The lights were dazzling, almost blinding, while the sound of clinking glasses and cheerful laughter echoed throughout the hall. My name drifted through the air, whispered like the punchline of a cruel joke. Stepping further into the venue, my footsteps sank into the thick, plush red carpet. My gaze locked onto the massive banner hanging above the stage. Farewell Party. Beneath it, on a gleaming table draped in white linen, sat my luggage. Beside it lay an envelope, my name elegantly written across it in her familiar handwriting. As I moved closer, the laughter around me grew louder, but the moment I picked up the envelope, the room fell into a heavy silence. My fingers trembled briefly as I opened it. Inside were divorce papers, already signed by her. My wife, no, my betrayer, stood in the center of the crowd. Her face was emotionless, stripped of the warmth I once adored. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her lips curled into a vicious smirk. "Your job is done," she said, her voice as sharp as shattered glass. "Leave now." I stared at her, then at her family gathered behind her. Their smug expressions barely concealed their satisfaction. They had planned this, orchestrated my humiliation like a twisted symphony. Rage burned beneath my skin, but I forced a slow, deliberate smile, one that made her hesitate. Leaning in close, my voice barely above a whisper, I said, "Then let's start the real farewell party." For the first time, her smirk faltered. A flicker of unease crossed her face. Straightening myself, I turned and walked out of the hall. They thought they had won, but they had no idea what I was truly capable of. For 5 years, I had been the perfect husband, loyal, supportive, trusting. I had built a life around her, sacrificed my own dreams to fuel hers, and embraced her family as my own. Her father's failing business? I revived it. Her brother's crushing debts? I cleared them. And yet, as I look back, the signs were always there. The hushed conversations between her and her mother that instantly stopped the moment I entered the room. The family trips I was never invited to. Her growing disinterest in me masked by constant exhaustion. I had ignored it all, blind to the storm brewing behind my back. Until tonight, the moment that changed everything. As I walked out of that hall, everything became painfully clear. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a coup. They had used me, drained me of my resources, and now discarded me like worthless trash. Sitting in my car outside the venue, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned stark white. I wanted to shout, to storm back in and confront them. But that's exactly what they expected. An impulsive outburst, a moment of weakness. No, they didn't deserve my rage. They deserved my silence, my patience, my cold, calculated revenge. I wiped away the tears threatening to fall, pulled out my phone, and started making calls. I've learned that revenge is best served in pieces, small, untraceable acts that slowly chip away at your enemy's foundation until it collapses beneath them. For the next 3 weeks, I methodically crafted their downfall. First, I turned my attention to her father. His business, once on the brink of failure, was thriving thanks to my investments. But it had one fatal flaw: dependency. I was its sole investor, the lifeline keeping it afloat. Silently, I withdrew my funds, rerouting them to his rival companies. A series of anonymous tips to the authorities ensured they discovered the financial discrepancies in his records. When the auditors came knocking, his empire crumbled overnight. Next was her brother. The gambling debts I had paid off were just the tip of the iceberg. I tracked down his former creditors, provided them with evidence of his hidden assets, and let them handle the rest. By the time they were through with him, he was drowning in more debt than he could ever repay. And then there was her, the woman who had sworn to love me, but had only loved what I could provide. Her carefully curated social image was her pride. A few leaked emails, private photos, and recorded conversations were enough to destroy her reputation. Friends abandoned her. Her image shattered. But I wasn't finished yet. Another party was being held, this time at their estate, a celebration to distract themselves from the chaos that had begun to consume their lives. Of course, I wasn't invited, but that didn't stop me. I arrived unannounced, walking into their home like I owned it. The chatter stopped. Heads turned. My wife's eyes widened, her face drained of color. Her father and brother stood frozen, the weight of their collective failures pressing down on them. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice quivering. I smiled. "I wanted to thank you for teaching me a valuable lesson." Her father stepped forward, trying to summon the arrogance he once wore like armor. "You think you can just walk in here?" "Sit," I said, cutting him off. My voice was calm, but the authority in it silenced him. I placed a stack of documents on the table. Proof of every move I had made, every account drained, every deal sabotaged, their entire empire dismantled, piece by piece. Their faces turned ashen as they flipped through the pages. "You took everything from me," I said, my voice low, cold. "So I did the same. Only I didn't stop at what you owed me. I took more." Her brother collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Her father stared at me, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. But my wife, she stood motionless, tears streaming down her face. "You'll regret this," she whispered, her voice breaking. I stepped closer, leaning in until our faces were inches apart. "No," I said softly. "You will." As I walked out of the crumbling estate, the sound of their despair faded behind me. I felt nothing but calm. The weight of their betrayal no longer suffocated me. They had taken everything, but I had reclaimed it, and more. In the end, I left them with nothing. No money, no reputation, no allies, just the hollow silence of their own ruin. I stood at the edge of the driveway, looking back one last time. Then, with a quiet laugh, I whispered to myself, "Now that's a farewell party." And I walked away victorious.